Today we are going to divide fractions and mixed numbers. So let's look at the problem 3 divided by 1/2. When we're solving a problem like this, we're asking ourselves how many times 1/2 goes into 3. And if you look at 3 holes visually, so here's 3 rectangles. How many 1/2s go into this one hole? You can see there's 2 halves in the second hole, and 2 halves in the third. So it's almost like 3 times 2, a total of 6 halves. All right, so 3 divided by 1/2 would be 6. Here's another example. 3 divided by 1/4. So again, we ask ourselves how many fourths are there in 3. So looking at each of the holes and splitting them up into fourths. There are 4 1/4ths in the first hole, 4 1/4ths in the second, and 4 in the third. So it's kind of like 3 divided by 1/4 is the same as 3 times 4 because there's 4 1/4ths. So 3 times 4 would be a total of 12 1/4ths altogether. So one more thing to think about before we look at the steps of dividing fractions and mixed numbers is this example here. If you had the problem 12 divided by 3, we know, 18 divided by 3. 18 divided by 3 we know is 6. What if I presented the multiplication problem though of 18 times 1/3? Well, if you had to solve this, we change 18 to 18 over 1, and then we'd multiply straight across, and we'd get 18 over 3, which simplifies to 6. So how can 18 divided by 3 and 18 times 1/3 both get the same solution? Well, that's because we're using multiplicative inverses or reciprocals. So one thing I want you to do, if you need to pause the video now to write down these highlighted vocabulary words in your spiral, I would do that now. Multiplicative inverse or reciprocal, those are synonyms. They just mean they're two numbers whose products are 1. So for example, 1/3 times 3 over 1, when you multiply straight across, you get 3 over 3, which is 1. So 1/3 is the reciprocal of 3 over 1. And you can find a reciprocal by basically just flipping around a fraction. So if you have 1/3, its reciprocal is 3 over 1. If you have 2/3, its reciprocal is 3 over 2. So we use that to help us solve division problems when we're working with fractions and mixed numbers. Instead of dividing by the fractions, we just rewrite those as multiplication problems by multiplying by the reciprocal. So for example, if you had 2 divided by 1/3, we can rewrite that as 2 times 3 over 1. And then we just multiply across and get 6. And we'll get the same, the product of this is the same as the quotient of the original problem. So let's try this out. So here's an example. First step would be to rewrite this division problem as a multiplication problem. So our first fraction stays exactly the same. 5/7 is still 5/7. We change the division to multiplication, and then we flip that second fraction to find its reciprocal or its multiplicative inverse. So that would be 3 over 2. Once we have that, we check that we can cross cancel, which we can't in this case, and we multiply straight across, getting 15 over 14, and then simplifying that to 1 and 1/14. So let's try that again. So we have 6 divided by 3/4. Our first fraction stays the same. This time I'm just going to put that 6 over 1 so we can visually see what we have to multiply in the next step. Change that division to multiplication, flip that second fraction to find its reciprocal. So you get 4 over 3. So remember, the only thing we change here is the second part. Our first fraction always stays the same. Now we just multiply across and simplify. So let's look at the steps we take when we are dividing mixed numbers. So mixed numbers, we start with similar steps to when we are multiplying them, and that is changing those mixed numbers into improper fractions. Once we have done that, then we follow the steps we just took. We change that division problem by keeping the first fraction the same, multiplying instead of dividing, and finding the reciprocal of that second fraction and multiply by the reciprocal. Cross cancel if we can to make the problem a little easier, multiply across and simplify to get our solution. So when we have the problem 1 3/4 divided by 2 1/8, we actually are solving the problem of 1 3/4 times the reciprocal of that second fraction. So let's do an example together. So we have 3 1/3 divided by 1 1/2. So first step, write those as improper fractions. Second step, rewrite the problem to multiply by the reciprocal. Remember that first fraction stays the same and we flip the second to find its multiplicative inverse. Cross cancel if possible. In this case we can't, so we multiply straight across and change our final answer into a mixed number. Let's do one more example together and then do a couple on your own. So starting with this division problem, we're going to first change those mixed numbers into improper fractions by multiplying the denominator times the whole number and adding the numerator. Once we have this, we are changing this to a multiplication problem by multiplying by the reciprocal of that second fraction, leaving the first fraction the same. Next, we are double checking if we can cross cancel to make this a little easier, in which we can. We can divide 12 and 8 by 4. So if we divide them both by 4, we get 3 and 2. And then multiply straight across and simplify if needed. So you're going to try this one on your own. Write this in your math spiral. Follow the steps that you have in the other example and pause the video and check back when you're done. If you did this correct, you should have gotten 4/9. Last example. This is a little different, but remember how you know that you can change any whole number into a fraction simply by putting it over 1. So write this one down in your spiral. Change that to 6/1 so you can visually see the fraction that you need to find its reciprocal of. And solve this one. Pause the video and check back when you're done. So if you solve this one correctly, you should get 11/12. And that is today's lesson.